It was supposed to be just another Saturday morning. That was the contract I had made with the day, a silent, unwritten agreement. The kind of Saturday where you lose yourself in the tangible, in the reliable world of chores and small repairs, and let the hours pass by without much thought. That's how I planned it, at least. The old Mustang, my 20-year project of love and frustration, had been giving me grief for weeks, a soft, unsettling squeal from the front right wheel every time I braked. I finally had the time to replace the brake pads. The garage, my sanctuary, smelled of motor oil and WD-40, with a faint, clean undertone of the citrus degreaser I'd used earlier to scrub away the grime. It was the scent of order being restored, of problems being solved with torque and leverage. The radio was on, tuned to a classic rock station, the volume low enough to be a humming, unobtrusive companion. The rhythmic sound of the wrench turning bolts, a satisfying metallic click and scrape, echoed in the space. It was a strangely soothing backdrop to my work, a meditation in 3/4-inch sockets. Emma popped her head in from time to time, a fleeting, beautiful apparition against the bright glare of the morning sun. A mug of coffee would be in her hand, her presence announced by the light, floral scent of her perfume, a scent so familiar I could close my eyes and conjure the image of her dabbing it behind her ears. She didn't stay long, just long enough to check on me, to flash a quick, brilliant smile, and then disappear back into the house, a hummingbird flitting at the edge of my world. She had mentioned her plans for the day earlier, over breakfast. A trip to the country club with her friend, Claire, for a late lunch, followed by a bit of shopping. Routine. Normal. Nothing to raise an eyebrow at. I barely looked up from the brake caliper as she spoke, just nodded and murmured an acknowledgement, my mind already on the stubborn cotter pin I was trying to extract. But then, noon came around, and the air in the garage shifted. The quality of the light changed. Emma walked in again, but this time she wasn't the same woman who had been flitting in and out all morning. This was a different version of her, a version I hadn't seen in a long time. She wore a beige dress, a simple, elegant sheath that hugged her figure in a way that made you look twice. It was a dress for an occasion, not a casual Saturday lunch. It was paired with elegant, strappy sandals that clicked softly, musically, against the oil-stained concrete floor. Her hair, which she usually wore in a quick ponytail or left in casual, beachy waves, was styled. Not just combed, but styled. A deliberate, intricate arrangement of curls and waves that must have taken an hour. She looked polished. She looked intentional. She looked too polished, too intentional, for an afternoon with Claire. I paused, wrench in hand, a smudge of grease on my cheek. I took her in, my mechanic's eye, trained to spot misalignments and subtle imperfections, suddenly applying itself to my wife. "You look nice," I said, and I worked to keep my tone neutral, a simple observation, nothing more. Emma smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips that showed she'd noticed my reaction, that she had, perhaps, intended it. She leaned down, the expensive fabric of her dress brushing against my greasy work jeans, and kissed me on the cheek. Her perfume seemed heavier now, more concentrated. "Don't wait up for me for dinner," she said, her voice a soft, casual melody. "We might stay out late." The words were simple. The tone was light, but something about them snagged in my mind. A burr on a smooth surface. Maybe it was the way her eyes, for the first time that morning, didn't quite meet mine. They flickered over my shoulder, toward the sunlit world beyond the garage. Or maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just a man covered in grease, imagining things because his wife looked beautiful. I didn't dwell on it. Not then. I watched her walk away, the click of her sandals a receding, rhythmic beat. I went back to tightening the last bolt on the brake caliper, focusing on the satisfying, physical reality of the task at hand. By the time I had bled the brakes, poured the fresh fluid, and tested the pedal, she was gone. The house felt quieter without her. The faint hum of the radio in the background now seemed too soft, too thin to fill the sudden, cavernous space she had left behind. I shrugged it off. I went inside and washed the grease from my hands until they were raw. People dress up sometimes, I told myself. That's all it is. She and Claire probably had some fancy new lunch spot in mind, a place where the waiters wore ties and the menu didn't have prices. Women liked that kind of thing. It wasn't worth a second thought. But as the hours stretched on, As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, lonely shadows across the lawn, I found myself thinking about that dress. About those sandals. About the way she said not to wait for her. Looking back now, I think that was the first crack in the foundation. A small, almost imperceptible hairline fracture. The kind you don't notice until the walls start to groan and the floor begins to shift beneath your feet. But at the time, I didn't know any of that. I just figured it was another Saturday, and Emma was doing what Emma did. Living her life, just as I was living mine. If only it had stayed that simple. If only I hadn't started paying attention. Maybe then, everything would have stayed intact. Maybe then, I wouldn't have found myself standing in the wreckage of what used to be our life. But cracks have a way of growing, don't they? And sometimes, all it takes is one small, unsettling moment to start pulling at the thread that unravels everything. Sunday mornings in our house were usually quiet, a slow and gentle unfolding. Emma liked to sleep in, a luxury she cherished after a long week. I, an early riser by nature, used the time to catch up on the small, mundane tasks of home ownership, a quiet ritual of puttering and tinkering. That day, I decided to tackle the mountain of laundry that had been threatening to spill out of the hamper in our closet. It was a mindless task, a way to keep my hands busy until Emma woke up and we could share a late, lazy breakfast. I didn't think much of it. Laundry was just laundry. I sorted through the clothes, the familiar rhythm of separating lights and darks, a comforting, domestic routine. T-shirts, jeans, Emma's blouses, my work shirts. Then, something caught my eye. It was subtle at first, a texture that didn't belong, a sleek black anomaly in a sea of familiar cottons and denims. I pulled it out, holding it up to the dim light of the laundry room. It was a tie, a black silk tie, smooth and expensive feeling, the kind of thing you'd see on a mannequin in a high-end department store. It was entirely out of place in my world. I frowned, turning it over in my hands. It wasn't mine. I was a man of open-collared shirts and the occasional, regrettable holiday-themed sweater. I didn't own a tie like this. I didn't even know anyone who did. Our circle of friends was a casual, comfortable bunch. Jeans and sneakers types. We didn't do black silk. I looked for a clue, a brand tag, a monogram, something that would explain its presence in my laundry basket. Nothing. It was pristine, almost new, the knot still faintly creased into the fabric. I tried to recall the last time anyone dressed in a suit had been in our house. A cousin's wedding, maybe? A year ago? It made no sense. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A simple mistake. Maybe it had been left behind after some long-forgotten gathering. Maybe Emma had borrowed it for a friend, for a costume, for a reason I couldn't fathom. It wasn't unusual for her to help friends plan events, to be the one who ended up with stray items in her bag at the end of the night. But still, something about it nagged at me. The elegance of it. The intimacy of it, tangled up with our own clothes, with my socks and her underwear. It felt like a foreign object, an artifact from another life. I hung it on the doorknob of the laundry room cabinet, a silent, black question mark. I walked away, telling myself it didn't feel worth confronting her about. Not yet. I wasn't the kind of husband who made a scene over something so trivial. I wasn't a jealous man. I was a rational man. And there was probably a rational explanation. But the thought lingered. Every time I passed the laundry room, my eyes were drawn to it. It was there, a quiet, insistent reminder that I didn't have an answer. Later that evening, Emma came home. She seemed relaxed, glowing, her face flushed from a day spent, she said, playing tennis at the club. We sat in the living room, her scrolling through her phone, me flipping aimlessly through TV channels, a comfortable, familiar silence between us. The tie was still on my mind. I decided to ask, my voice a carefully constructed imitation of casual curiosity. Hey, I said, as if the thought had only just occurred to me. Do you know where that tie came from? The black one, in the laundry. Her eyes flicked from her phone to my face, and then, for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, toward the laundry room. I saw it then. The same thing I'd seen in the garage. A faint crease appeared between her brows, a tiny, fleeting tightening of her features. It was there for a split second, and then it was gone, smoothed over by a light, easy laugh. Oh, that, she said, the laugh a little too bright. That's James's. Remember we were helping him prepare for his anniversary party last week? He must have left it. I must have accidentally thrown it in the laundry bag with everything else. I should text him. The answer was smooth. It was practiced, but it wasn't unbelievable. James was a mutual friend, a real estate broker who did, on occasion, wear a suit. It made sense. And yet, something in her tone, in the speed of her explanation, in that initial, fleeting flicker of what? Surprise? Annoyance? It didn't sit right with me. Makes sense, I said, keeping my voice even, turning my attention back to the television. But as she turned back to her phone, I couldn't help but notice how quickly the crease in her brow had disappeared, like a door closing, shutting off whatever had been there for that brief, fleeting moment. That night, as I lay in bed, the space between us feeling suddenly wider, I thought about the tie. I thought about her answer. I thought about the way her laugh had felt just a little too light, her explanation just a little too polished. It wasn't enough to accuse her of anything. It wasn't enough to start a fight, but it was enough. It was enough to plant a seed of doubt, a tiny, poisonous splinter under my skin. I told myself to let it go, to trust her, to trust the 20 years we had built together. But trust, I was beginning to realize, is a fragile, delicate thing. And once it's cracked, no matter how small the crack, you can't help but wonder when it's going to shatter completely. By the following weekend, I had almost convinced myself that the tie was a forgotten issue. Emma had offered an explanation, a plausible one, and there was no concrete reason to doubt her. Life had settled back into its familiar rhythm. But the splinter remained lodged in the back of my mind, a small, persistent irritant. And it wasn't long before another oddity surfaced, another small, inexplicable detail that pressed on the nerve. It started innocently enough. We had planned a picnic, one of those rare, perfect autumn days where the air is crisp and the sun is warm. I decided to clean out Emma's car, a task I hadn't undertaken in months, to make room for the cooler and blankets. I figured I'd find the usual suburban detritus, reusable grocery bags, stray receipts from the gas station, maybe an old, forgotten coffee cup. Instead, I found something else. Tucked into the corner of the trunk, partially hidden beneath a folded emergency umbrella, was a small, dark blue velvet box. My heart did a strange little lurch as I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected, the kind of satisfying weight that suggests value. Slowly, my fingers fumbling slightly, I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, were a pair of gold cufflinks. They were simple, elegant, polished to a mirror shine, and they were engraved with the initials AR. I stared at them for a long, silent moment, the sun glinting off the polished gold. My mind raced. They were the kind of accessory a man would wear to a high-end business meeting, a black tie event. They were definitely not mine. My own cufflink collection consisted of a single, novelty pair shaped like Star Wars TIE fighters, a gag gift from my brother that I had never worn. Who was AR? My first instinct was to march into the house and demand an explanation. But I hesitated. I remembered the tie. I remembered her smooth, practiced answer. If I confronted her now, unprepared, she would have another one ready. Another plausible story, another easy dismissal that would make me feel like a paranoid, jealous fool. No, not yet. I needed to think. I needed to process. So, I did something that felt both foreign and necessary. I took out my phone and took a picture of the cufflinks in their box. Then, I put the box back, exactly where I had found it, hidden beneath the umbrella. I went about cleaning the car as if nothing had happened, my movements mechanical, my mind 1,000 miles away. That night, the cufflinks gnawed at me. As we lay in bed, the lights off, the room bathed in the faint, silvery glow of the street lamp outside, I decided to bring them up. My voice, when I spoke, was a carefully constructed imitation of casual, almost disinterested, curiosity. I found a pair of cufflinks in your car today, I said into the darkness. Emma shifted beside me, the sheets rustling. She propped herself up on one elbow, her silhouette a dark, graceful shape against the window. Cufflinks, she repeated, as if she hadn't heard me right, as if the word itself was a foreign concept. Then, a small, soft laugh. Oh, those. They must be Richard's. From the charity auction at work. He was one of the sponsors. He asked me to hold on to them for him after the event. I completely forgot they were in there. Richard. A.R. Anthony Richard Sterling. The CEO of the company where she worked. A man I had met a handful of times at corporate events. A man who exuded an aura of wealth and power. It was plausible, but it felt too neat. Her explanation was quick. It was smooth. Too smooth. There was no hesitation, no flicker of surprise. If anything, her tone was one of faint annoyance at herself for being so forgetful. I couldn't find a crack in her story. I couldn't find a flaw in her logic. Makes sense, I said, rolling onto my back, staring up at the ceiling. But it didn't. Not entirely. The box had been in the trunk, buried under other items. If she was just holding on to them for her boss, a valuable item from a work event, why not keep them in her office? Why not in her jewelry box? Why in the trunk of her car, hidden under an umbrella, as if forgotten or concealed? And why hadn't she mentioned them until I did? Over the next few days, I started noticing patterns. Little things. Her phone, which she used to leave face up on the kitchen counter, was now always face down, a silent, black slab. She began staying out later, her excuses always vague, always plausible. A last-minute meeting with a client. A spontaneous dinner with Claire. When I'd ask about her day, her answers were polished but brief, as if she were reading from a script, giving me the headlines, but none of the details. The gym became another source of quiet suspicion. Emma had always been diligent about staying fit, her morning jogs a fixed part of her routine. But now, her routine had become erratic. There were extra trips to the gym on weekdays, spontaneous sessions on weekends. When I offered to join her for a class, she laughed and said it was her alone time, her one chance to de-stress without having to talk to anyone. None of it was damning on its own. A forgotten tie, a pair of cufflinks, extra gym visits, a desire for privacy. Each piece of the puzzle, when viewed in isolation, was innocent. But when I started to put them together, they formed the outline of a picture I didn't want to see. I found myself becoming an unwilling detective in my own life. I was retracing her steps in my mind, replaying conversations, analyzing her tone of voice, her body language. I felt like I was losing my mind, caught in a spiral of suspicion and self-doubt. Was I being paranoid? Was I stringing together unrelated events to create a story that wasn't there? Or was I finally seeing the truth? I wasn't the kind of man to jump to conclusions. I was a man who believed in evidence, in facts. But I wasn't stupid, either. Emma had always been an open book to me. Now, it felt like she was writing entire chapters without me, in a language I couldn't understand. The trust that had been the bedrock of our marriage was beginning to crack. And the thing about cracks, I was learning, is that they only get bigger if you ignore them. By this point, I couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at me, a persistent, acidic unease in the pit of my stomach. Something was off. Emma's explanations were always neat, always polished, almost rehearsed. And though they aligned with the physical evidence, the tie, the cufflinks, they left a bitter aftertaste. It wasn't jealousy, not in the traditional, hot-headed sense. And it wasn't paranoia. It was something deeper, colder. It was the quiet, chilling instinct of a man watching the architecture of his life being subtly, systematically dismantled. But I wasn't ready to confront her outright. That would be an emotional, chaotic affair, a battle of accusations and denials. If I was going to take that step, if I was going to risk shattering our life based on a collection of suspicions, I needed more. I needed proof. Real, undeniable, irrefutable proof. I decided to proceed carefully, methodically. Emma was sharp, intelligent. If she was hiding something, she was doing it with a masterful touch. One misstep on my part, one clumsy accusation, and she would retreat, building her walls higher, making the truth impossible to find. I started with a simple, subtle test. One evening, Emma told me she'd be out with Claire again, this time for dinner at a new Italian restaurant they had been wanting to try. It sounded routine, nothing out of the ordinary. But I decided to call her, about 45 minutes after she had left, under the pretense of needing her help finding something. "Hey, Emma," I said, keeping my voice light, casual. "Sorry to bother you, but I can't find the contract for the kitchen renovation. Do you remember where you put it?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was just a second, maybe two, but in that small space of silence, my heart hammered against my ribs. I had caught her off guard. Then, her tone softened, becoming steady, helpful. "Oh, it's in the blue folder, in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the hallway. You must have missed it." I listened carefully, not just to her words, but to the sounds in the background. I could hear the faint, ambient hum of conversations, the occasional clink of glass, the soft, unobtrusive melody of some light jazz music. It was exactly what you would expect to hear at a restaurant. Everything checked out. She even asked if I'd eaten dinner, a thoughtful, wifely question that seemed to reaffirm her innocence. But just as I was about to hang up, just as I was starting to feel a wave of relief, a wave of shame for my suspicion, I caught something else. A male voice. Faint, but distinct. "Hey, Emma," the voice said. "Everything okay?" I froze. The voice was close to her, too close to be a waiter or another diner at a nearby table. And there was a familiarity in his tone, an easy intimacy that didn't sit right with me. The next day, I checked the filing cabinet. The blue folder was there. The contract was inside, exactly where she said it would be. Everything lined up. Her story was perfect. But that voice, that single, intrusive, familiar-sounding male voice, still lingered in my mind. The second phase of my plan required a little more effort, a step further into the murky territory of espionage that made me feel like a stranger to myself. I had a GPS tracker, a small, discreet magnetic device that I used during long road trips to track my route and mileage. That morning, while Emma was in the shower, I retrieved it from the glove compartment of my car. My hands were trembling as I walked to her car in the garage. This felt like a violation, a point of no return. But the need to know, the need to either confirm my fears or extinguish them forever, was stronger than my guilt. I slipped the tracker into the trunk of her car, hiding it under the carpeted lining. It was secure, almost invisible, and linked to an app on my phone. That evening, when Emma left for another supposed outing with Claire, I opened the app and watched. My heart pounded as I saw the small, blinking dot representing her car move across the digital map. At first, everything seemed normal. She drove directly to the restaurant where they often met. For about 2 hours, the car remained stationary. Then, as the third hour ticked by, the car started moving again. But it wasn't heading home. The tracker showed her heading toward a quiet, affluent residential area, a neighborhood of large, secluded houses set back from the road. I knew the area well. It wasn't near any restaurants, shops, or landmarks. My pulse quickened as I stared at the blinking dot on the screen. It came to a stop in front of one of the largest houses on the street and stayed there for over an hour before finally, slowly, making its way home. When Emma came in later that night, I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book. I tried to sound as casual as possible. "How was dinner?" I asked. "Did you stop anywhere else afterward?" She smiled, her expression as calm and untroubled as ever. "Oh yes. Claire forgot her phone at the restaurant, so we had to circle back to get it. And then, on the way home, we drove through that new development over on the east side, just to look at the houses. Can you imagine living in one of those places?" Her explanation was flawless. It was brilliant. It accounted for the route, the extra time, the stop in the residential neighborhood. It was a perfect, airtight alibi that made me feel, once again, like a paranoid fool. And yet, something still felt off. The third part of my plan involved one of the most basic, most primal senses, smell. Emma had a favorite silk shawl, a beautiful, patterned piece she wore whenever she went out in the evening. She had worn it the night of the restaurant, the night of the phantom male voice. But this time, when she left for a girls' night, she left it behind. When she came home, I met her at the door, taking her coat. As I leaned in to kiss her, I caught it. A faint, unfamiliar scent clinging to the fabric of her dress. It wasn't her usual perfume. It was something musky, distinctly masculine. Cologne. "Did something happen?" I asked, feigning concern. "You smell different." Emma laughed softly, a light, dismissive sound. "Oh, you won't believe it." The waiter at the new place we tried, a complete klutz. He spilled a drink on the man at the table next to us, and I think some of his cologne must have splashed onto me. The poor guy. Her answer was quick. It was creative. But my gut, that primal, unerring instinct, told me it was a lie. The inconsistencies. The vague explanations. The perfect, almost too perfect alibis. They were all starting to add up. Each piece of the puzzle, on its own, was innocent. But together, they were painting a picture I couldn't ignore, a portrait of a life, a marriage. That was not what it seemed. Emma was hiding something. I didn't know what it was yet. I didn't know who was involved. But I was determined to find out. The next step wasn't just about gathering more evidence. It was about escalation. If she was going to keep her secrets, I was going to uncover them. and I was no longer going to do it alone. I don't know what was worse. The relentless, circling doubts in my own head, or the growing, sickening realization that I was actively hoping to find something. It's a strange, masochistic impulse to want to be proven right when being right means your entire world is a lie. A part of you, the part that still clings to the memory of love and trust, prays that you're wrong, that it's all in your head. But another part, the cold, calculating part that has taken over, keeps telling you to dig deeper. By now, it was no longer just about the tie, the cufflinks, or the faint, ghostly scent of another man's cologne. It was about Emma herself, the little shifts in her behavior, the way her responses felt rehearsed, polished to a high sheen, the almost imperceptible sense of distance that had crept into our conversations, into our bed, into the very air of our home. I decided it was time to bring in reinforcements. Not the kind who would offer sympathetic platitudes or tell me to jump to conclusions. I needed fresh eyes. I needed perspectives that weren't clouded by the 20 years of love and history that were currently blinding me. Ethan was the first person I thought of. He was my best friend from college, a man who approached life with the meticulous, analytical mind of a detective in a crime novel. Then there was Noah, my neighbor, a bear of a man who owed me a favor after I'd helped him save a small fortune by repairing the leaky roof on his garage last summer. He was loyal, discreet, and surprisingly observant. Lastly, there was Victor, a former military man I'd met through a local volunteer group. His instincts were sharper than anyone I knew, honed by years of reading situations and people. He still owed me for a loan I'd given him, no questions asked, for his sister's emergency surgery. Together, they formed a small, trusted team, a council of war. When I explained everything to them, we were standing in my garage, the air thick with the smell of motor oil and the faint, sweet scent of sawdust. I laid it all out, the timeline, the evidence, the alibis, the tie, the cufflinks, the GPS tracker, the strange scent, Emma's polished, almost too perfect responses. I'm not saying she's cheating. I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. But something doesn't add up. She's hiding something, and I need to know what it is. Ethan was the first to speak, his expression thoughtful. You're doing the right thing, man. If she's hiding something, we'll find out. If not, at least you'll have peace of mind. Noah nodded, his arms crossed over his broad chest. But we've got to be smart about this. No amateur sleuthing. No obvious moves. If she suspects you're onto her, she'll just lock it down tighter. Victor, who had been listening in a quiet, intense silence, finally spoke. His voice was low, decisive. Subtlety is key. Let her think she's in control. Let her think you believe her. While we gather the pieces, their words, their immediate, unquestioning support, were a balm to my frayed nerves. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Our first move was simple surveillance. Ethan had a drone, a quiet, high-end model with a long battery life and an excellent camera. If Emma's outings involved more than what she was telling me, we'd see it. We put the plan into action the next time she announced she was going out for a late dinner with the girls. Ethan, operating the drone from his car parked a block away, was our eye in the sky. He was a pro, keeping a safe, unobtrusive distance as Emma's car pulled into the parking lot of a high-end restaurant downtown. At first, everything seemed normal. She met a group of people, sharply dressed men and women who looked like business colleagues. But then, she stepped out onto the restaurant's terrace, alone. Her face, even on the small screen of Ethan's monitor, looked tense. She was speaking into her phone, her hand gestures sharp, urgent, as if she were trying to explain something important, something complex. The drone's camera couldn't pick up audio over the background noise of the city, but her body language was telling. This wasn't a casual chat. This was a crisis. Meanwhile, Noah was our man on the ground. Armed with a leash and his enormous, friendly Great Dane, Max, he strolled casually around the restaurant's perimeter. A man walking his dog in an upscale neighborhood was a perfect cover. It drew no attention. He managed to get close enough to the terrace to overhear snippets of Emma's conversation. "No, I can't do it right now," he heard her say, her voice low, strained. "It's too risky. We need to finish this by Friday." He's starting to ask questions. The tone wasn't romantic. It wasn't affectionate. If anything, she sounded scared. Trapped. The fragments of conversation raised more questions than they answered. Victor, ever the strategist, took the next, more audacious step. Using a fake name and a polished, confident persona he had clearly honed over years, he scheduled an appointment at Emma's workplace, a high-level marketing firm, posing as a potential client with a multi-million-dollar account. He observed her in her element during a meeting with her boss, a charismatic, silver-haired man named Caleb. Their conversation, Victor later reported, was quiet, intense, held in a glass-walled conference room. But Victor, with his keen hearing and years of practice, caught enough to understand that the stakes were incredibly high. He heard phrases like, "If this gets out, the company won't survive," and "We have to contain this before Alex finds out." We regrouped in my garage that night, the air heavy with a new, more dangerous set of unanswered questions. Each of us had brought back a piece of the puzzle, but the full picture was still frustratingly, terrifyingly elusive. Victor summarized it best, his face grim in the dim light. "This isn't just about an affair," he said, his voice low. "Whatever she's caught up in, it's bigger than that. Much bigger." The word bigger settled in my chest like a lead weight. For the first time, a new, terrifying possibility began to form in my mind. What if this wasn't about her betraying me? What if she was in trouble? Real trouble? What if she was a victim of something she couldn't control and not a perpetrator of a simple, sordid affair? One thing was clear. I couldn't stop now. I had to know the truth, no matter where it led. And this, I realized with a chilling certainty, was just the beginning. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but they didn't form a picture I recognized. They were jagged, disconnected fragments that hinted at a reality far more complex and dangerous than a simple infidelity. The tie, the cufflinks, the faint male voice on the phone. Those were the artifacts of a potential affair. But the cryptic, fear-laced snippets of conversation, the hushed, high-stakes meetings at her office, that was something else entirely. Victor's observation from her workplace stuck with me, replaying on a loop in my mind. "If this gets out, the company won't survive." Those words echoed with a significance that transcended personal betrayal. What could be so damaging, so catastrophic, that it could bring down a major corporation? And why did Emma, my Emma, look so tense, so hunted, when she thought no one was watching? The narrative in my head began to shift. The image of the unfaithful wife was slowly being replaced by something more ambiguous, more troubling. Was she a villain? Or was she a victim? I decided it was time for more direct action. Not a confrontation, not yet. But I needed to get closer. I needed to observe her in her natural environment, her workplace, without her knowing. I needed to see the dynamics for myself. That's when Ethan, our resident tech wizard, came through with an idea that was both brilliant and deeply unsettling. "I've got something for you," he said one night, as the four of us gathered in the garage, our makeshift war room. He pulled out a sleek, black velvet box, the kind that might hold an expensive piece of jewelry. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a pen. It was polished, elegant, a high-end executive pen, entirely unassuming. "It's not just a pen," Ethan explained, a small, proud smile on his face. He turned it over, revealing a tiny, nearly invisible lens embedded near the clip. "It's a high-definition camera with a voice-activated recorder. The battery lasts for 8 hours. Give her this. Say it's a corporate gift you got, something you have no use for. She'll never suspect it." It was perfect. It was also a profound violation of her privacy, a step across a line I never thought I would cross. But the time for moral hand-wringing was over. I needed the truth. The next morning, I left the pen on the kitchen counter with a small, handwritten note. Asterisk, got this at a conference. Thought you'd like it for work. Looks professional. R. Asterisk. When Emma saw it, she smiled, a genuine, pleased smile. "Oh, that's beautiful, Ryan. Thank you." She picked it up, admiring its weight and balance, then tucked it into her designer handbag without a second thought. The Trojan horse was inside the gates. That evening, as I downloaded the footage with Ethan and Noah, my stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. The camera, clipped to the pocket of her blouse, was angled slightly askew, capturing only part of her desk and the doorway to her office. At first, the day's activity seemed routine. Emma typing away on her laptop, the click-clack of her keyboard a steady rhythm. Her taking calls, her voice professional, competent, her occasionally glancing at her phone, her expression unreadable. But then, Her boss, Caleb, walked in. The energy in the room shifted instantly. He didn't knock. He simply entered, closing the door firmly behind him. Emma's body stiffened, her fingers pausing mid-type. Caleb leaned over her desk, his presence looming, intimidating. His voice was low, but firm, the camera's microphone picking it up with a chilling clarity. "You understand what's at stake here, Emma?" Caleb said, his tone sharp, leaving no room for argument. "This isn't optional." Emma's voice, when she finally responded, was quiet, hesitant. "I know, but I'm running out of time. Caleb, I don't want to do this." "You don't have a choice," Caleb snapped, cutting her off. "If Alex finds out before we're ready, he'll bury us both." He didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Emma turned her face away from the camera, but I could see her shoulders slump, as though the weight of the world had just settled upon them. She looked defeated, trapped. Caleb straightened up, smoothing the front of his expensive suit. "You'll do what needs to be done," he said, his voice now cold, clinical. "You don't want this getting out any more than I do." With that, he turned and left, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. Emma remained seated, her head in her hands, her body trembling ever so slightly. The footage ended there, but it was more than enough. My mind raced with 1,000 new questions. Who was Alex? Clearly, someone with immense power, someone they were both terrified of. What was this information they were so desperate to conceal? And what role was Emma playing in all of this? Was Caleb her co-conspirator or her blackmailer? I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The image of Emma's trembling shoulders burned into my mind. Part of me, the husband, felt a surge of protective instinct. I wanted to storm into her office, to confront Caleb, to pull her out of whatever dangerous game she was caught in. But the other part of me, the rational, calculating part that had taken over, knew better. I needed more information. If I was going to confront Emma, if I was going to help her, I couldn't go in half-cocked. I needed something undeniable. I needed to know the full story. The next day, I called Victor. "She's in over her head," I said, my voice low, urgent. "I think she's in real trouble. But I still don't know how much of this is her doing, and how much is being done to her." Victor didn't miss a beat. His voice was calm, steady, a rock in my swirling sea of confusion. "Then we keep digging," he said. "No assumptions, no accusations, just the facts." And so, we pressed on, a small, secret army fighting a war we didn't yet understand. We were determined to uncover the truth, no matter how messy, no matter how painful it turned out to be. The cracks in Emma's facade were widening. And soon, I knew, the whole thing would come crashing down. I just wasn't sure if I was ready for what I might find buried in the rubble. The footage of Caleb and Emma's tense, cryptic exchange played on a continuous, tormenting loop in my mind. "If Alex finds out, he'll bury us both." The words were a constant, humming undercurrent to my days. I could no longer convince myself this was about a simple misunderstanding or a series of unfortunate coincidences. The weight of their words, the palpable fear in Emma's posture, the cold, menacing authority in Caleb's voice, it all pointed to something far more sinister than an office romance. I didn't know whether Emma was a victim or an accomplice, a pawn or a player. But the time for passive observation, for wondering and waiting, was over. I needed answers. And I needed them now. The opportunity came sooner than I had expected. Emma had left her work laptop open in the living room one evening after a late night at the office. It was an uncharacteristically careless move for someone who had become so guarded, so secretive. She usually logged out, or took her devices with her to the bedroom, a silent, digital wall between us. I waited until I heard the sound of the shower running upstairs. Then, my heart pounding in my ears, my hands slick with a nervous sweat, I quietly sat down at the coffee table. I hesitated for a long, agonizing moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. This felt like a final, irrevocable transgression. But the thought of Emma in trouble, of her being threatened or coerced, overrode my guilt. This wasn't just snooping anymore. This was a rescue mission. Or an investigation. I wasn't sure which. I clicked on her messaging app, the one she used for work communications. The chat window with Caleb was already open. The most recent messages, sent just that afternoon, were staring back at me like a slap in the face. "Caleb, are you sure about tomorrow? You can still back out. There are other ways. Emma, no? I've made up my mind. I want to move forward with this. It's the only way. Caleb, the hotel is booked. Room 213. I'll meet you there at 7. Don't be late. Emma, understood. I'll be there. The words hit me like a freight train. Hotel. Room 213. There was no ambiguity here. No wiggle room for doubt. My mind, which had been leaning towards the theory of blackmail and coercion, was violently thrown in the opposite direction. Emma wasn't being manipulated, not in the way I had thought. She was an active, willing participant. Whatever was going on, she had chosen this path. I snapped a picture of the screen with my phone, the click of the shutter sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. Then, I carefully closed the laptop and returned it to its original position. I sat back on the couch, staring at nothing, as the cold, hard realization settled in my bones. She wasn't just hiding something. She was actively, deliberately deceiving me. The next day, I began preparing for the inevitable confrontation. But I couldn't go in blindly, fueled by anger and hurt. That would only lead to chaos, to more lies and denials. No, I needed a plan. A methodical, calculated, inescapable approach. This wasn't just about satisfying my own need for the truth anymore. It was about protecting myself, my home, my life, from the fallout of whatever bomb was about to detonate. I installed a small, wide-angle camera in Emma's car, carefully tucking it into the plastic lining of the dashboard. It was nearly invisible, and with the live feed linked to my phone, I could watch her movements in real time. That evening, when she told me she was heading out for a late strategy meeting at the office, I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway. Then, with trembling hands, I opened the app. Emma's route was predictable at first. She drove straight to a high-end restaurant downtown, parking in a secluded corner of the attached garage. Moments later, Caleb's car pulled in beside hers. He got out, walked briskly to her car, and climbed into the passenger seat. My pulse quickened as I watched their interaction unfold on the small screen of my phone. The audio was faint, but clear enough to hear the tension in their voices. "Are you sure about this?" Caleb asked, his voice low. "There's no going back after tonight." "I'm sure," Emma replied, her voice firm, resolute. "I've been waiting for this for too long." The kiss that followed was brief, but unmistakable. It wasn't a kiss of passion or love. It was a kiss of conspiracy, a sealing of a pact. She was the one who initiated it, leaning toward him without hesitation. My stomach churned as I watched them pull away, their faces lit with a strange mixture of determination and guilt. They drove off together, in her car, the camera tracking their route to a luxury hotel across town. I didn't need to follow them. I already knew where they were going. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more piece of the plan to put into place. Earlier that day, Victor, using his considerable skills of persuasion and a well-placed bribe to a hotel maintenance worker, had arranged for a hidden recording device to be placed in room 213. A tiny, sophisticated piece of equipment tucked neatly into the base of a decorative lamp. If there were any lingering doubts about Emma's intentions, this would settle them once and for all. Hours later, sitting in the cold, silent darkness of my garage, with my phone connected to the live audio feed from the hotel room, I listened. The sound was crystal clear. Every word cut deeper than the last. It wasn't the sound of a sordid, passionate affair. It was the sound of a business transaction. They were discussing data, spreadsheets, offshore accounts. They were talking about embezzlement. A massive, multi-million-dollar scheme to defraud their own company, with the ultimate target being the man they both feared, Alex, the company's ruthless and brilliant founder. "He'll never see it coming," Caleb said, his voice a low, confident murmur. "By the time the auditors figure it out, we'll be long gone." "But what about my husband?" Emma asked, her voice hesitant. "What about him?" Caleb replied, his tone dismissive. "You said it yourself. This is easier. He thinks you're having an affair. Let him. A divorce is cleaner, quieter. He gets the house, you get your freedom. And half of $20 million. This is easier, asterisk." That final sentence broke something inside me. This wasn't about another man. This wasn't about a failing marriage or a loss of love. This was about money. Greed. She was willing to betray me, to lie to me, to drag our life through the mud, not out of passion, but as a matter of convenience. As a cover story for a federal crime. I ended the recording and stared at the silent screen of my phone. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, it all coalesced into a single, cold, hard point of clarity. I had everything I needed. Proof of her lies. Proof of her crimes. There was no longer any room for doubt, for pity, for love. The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared, it was all gone. Replaced by a stranger and a crime scene. That night, when she came home, I couldn't even look at her. Every word she spoke was a lie. Every smile was a mask. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it on my terms. The cracks in our marriage had widened into a chasm. And soon, everything would collapse. But when it did, it would be on my timeline. I wasn't going to lash out. I wasn't going to lose control. I was going to expose her and her partner in crime with a cold, surgical precision, leaving no room for excuses, no possibility of escape. And believe me, when the time came, she wouldn't see it coming. If I was going to confront her, it couldn't be a messy, emotional explosion in our kitchen. It needed to be methodical. It needed to be undeniable. It needed to be inescapable. And then, she handed me the perfect stage, a golden, engraved invitation to her own demise. We're hosting a small corporate party this Friday, she announced over dinner a few days later, her voice bright, cheerful, utterly oblivious to the storm gathering just behind my eyes. Just a few key colleagues and clients. Nothing too elaborate. Can you help me set up? Her request came with a smile, the kind of easy, confident smile that might have softened me in the past, a smile that now felt rehearsed, calculated. She was bringing them into my home. Caleb, the colleagues she was systematically defrauding. She was going to use our life, our home, as the backdrop for her intricate web of lies. I forced myself to smile back, a grim, muscular effort. Of course, I said, my voice a smooth, placid sea. Whatever you need. If she thought this party would be her safe haven, a celebration of her success, she was wrong. This wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be an unveiling. The day of the party, I worked quietly but deliberately, making sure everything was ready. Not for her guests, but for my plan. I transferred all the evidence, the screenshots of the messages, the damning audio recordings from the hotel room, the crystal clear video footage from the car, to a secure flash drive. Then, I connected the drive to the large smart TV in our living room, the centerpiece of the space where the party would be held. With a single press of a button on a small, discreet remote, I could display it all. I didn't want a screaming match. I didn't want a chaotic, he said she said scene. I wanted the truth to speak for itself, cold, impartial, and utterly devastating. By the time the first guests arrived, the house was buzzing with the low hum of polite conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, the scent of expensive perfume and catered appetizers. Emma floated through the room, a vision of effortless grace and charm. She was wearing a stunning, emerald green dress, her laughter bright and easy as she greeted her colleagues. She looked radiant. She looked like the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But now, I saw it for what it was, a performance. A brilliant, flawless performance. Then I saw him. Caleb. He was standing near the drinks table, a glass of champagne in his hand, casually chatting with a group of coworkers. His confidence was palpable, his smile smug and self-assured. He was a king in his stolen castle. My fists clenched involuntarily at my sides, but I forced myself to remain calm, to circulate, to play the role of the supportive, slightly overwhelmed husband. I watched as Emma drifted toward him, her path through the crowded room seemingly inevitable. Her demeanor shifted as she approached him, a subtle change in her posture, a new light in her eyes. She leaned in close, her hand brushing his arm as she whispered something in his ear. He laughed softly, a low, intimate sound that grated against my raw nerves. It was time. I stepped into the center of the room, my own wine glass in my hand. I tapped it gently with my finger, the clear, ringing sound cutting through the ambient chatter. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward me. Emma's gaze lingered on me, her expression curious but calm. Caleb's smug smile faltered, just for a moment. Thank you all for coming. I began, my voice steady, resonant. Emma told me this would be a night to remember, and she was right. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. I'd like to share something with all of you. A little insight into the kind of connections that have been built at Ascend Marketing. I picked up the small remote from the mantelpiece. and I pressed the button. The 60-inch television screen sprang to life, displaying a series of crystal-clear screenshots from Emma's incriminating chat with Caleb. Asterisk, the hotel is booked. Room 213. I'll be there. Asterisk. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I turned to see Emma, frozen in place, her face drained of all color, her wine glass slipping from her numb fingers to shatter on the hardwood floor. Caleb was trying to edge his way toward the door, his face a mask of pale, sweaty panic. "I'm not done," I said, my voice sharp, commanding. I clicked the remote again. The screen shifted to the video footage from the dashboard camera. The kiss in the car. The cold, conspiratorial conversation. The audience's shock turned to low, angry murmurs. Whispers of, "Oh my God," and "I can't believe it," filled the room. Finally, I played the audio recording from the hotel room. The sound was pristine. Emma's voice filled the room, confessing her plan, her motives. "This is easier." The words echoed like a funeral bell, marking the end of everything she had built. Emma's face crumbled as the last recording ended. Her carefully constructed persona, the image of the brilliant, successful, respectable woman, had been utterly and publicly shattered, leaving her exposed and vulnerable in front of her colleagues, her clients, her world. Caleb's expression was a mixture of pure, animalistic panic and murderous rage. "Alex," Emma began, taking a stumbling step toward me, her voice a broken, pleading whisper. "Please, let me explain." "Explain?" I snapped, the last of my control finally breaking. "Explain what, Emma? Explain how you lied to me? Explain how you were planning to steal millions of dollars? Explain how you brought him," I said, pointing a trembling finger at Caleb. "Into my house. Into our life? No, Emma. You don't get to explain. You've already said more than enough." I turned my furious gaze to Caleb. "Get out of my house. Now." He didn't argue. He didn't even look at me. He grabbed his coat and bolted for the door, shoving past the stunned, silent guests on his way out. As the murmurs in the room grew louder, I addressed the remaining guests, my voice cold and final. "The party's over. You're all welcome to leave." One by one, they filed out, some offering awkward, mumbled apologies, others avoiding my gaze entirely, their faces a mixture of shock and pity. Soon, only Emma and I were left, standing in the wreckage of the party, in the wreckage of our life. She stood in the center of the room, tears streaming down her face, her shoulders trembling with silent, racking sobs. "You destroyed us, Emma," I said, my voice quiet now, empty of rage, filled only with a vast, desolate sorrow. "You destroyed everything. And now, you'll have to face the consequences." I didn't wait for her response. I walked upstairs, leaving her standing alone in the debris, the shattered glass of her wine glass glittering on the floor like fallen stars. The morning after the party, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The anger, the grief, the confusion. It had all been burned away in the crucible of the previous night's confrontation, leaving behind a cold, hard, and resolute purpose. The unveiling had laid everything bare, but it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I sat at the kitchen table, the house eerily silent, the remnants of the party, a few stray napkins, a forgotten wine glass, a stark reminder of the demolition. I sipped my coffee and planned my next move. Emma had spent the night in the master bedroom. I hadn't heard a sound from her, and I didn't care. She was no longer my concern, not in the way she used to be. She was a problem to be managed, a liability to be contained. I called Lucas Hayes, a divorce attorney with a reputation as ruthless as he was brilliant. His name had been given to me by a colleague who had gone through a particularly nasty split. "If you want to win," my colleague had said, "you call Lucas." When I laid out my case in his office later that morning, presenting the evidence I had collected, the messages, the recordings, the footage, Lucas leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, predatory smirk curling his lips. "This isn't just a divorce case, my friend," he said, his voice a low, confident purr. "This is a complete and utter obliteration. We're not just ending a marriage, we're scorching the earth." Lucas wasted no time. By the end of the day, he had filed an emergency motion with the court, citing the evidence of the embezzlement scheme and Emma's act of deception. He successfully argued to have all our joint assets frozen immediately. Her access to our bank accounts was cut off. Her credit cards were declined at the gas station. Her phone call to me later that afternoon was laced with a frantic, rising panic. "Ryan, what's going on? I can't access any of our money. My cards aren't working." "You made your choice, Emma," I said, my voice calm, steady, a mirror of the control I now felt. "These are the consequences. Get used to them." I hung up without another word. But Lucas wasn't just focused on our personal finances. He had another ace up his sleeve: the professional implications of Emma and Caleb's affair and their criminal conspiracy. He compiled a detailed, meticulously documented report, complete with every damning piece of evidence, and had it delivered directly to the personal office of Alex Sterling, the founder and CEO of Ascend Marketing, the very man they had been so terrified of. The corporate world is a ruthless place. Scandals like this, especially involving high-level executives and massive financial fraud, aren't just frowned upon. They are career-ending, reputation-destroying events. Within days, Caleb was summoned to an emergency meeting with the board of directors. According to Lucas's sources within the company, the chairman didn't mince words. "You have violated our code of conduct, misused your authority, and conspired to commit grand larceny against this company. You're terminated, effective immediately." There was no severance package, no soft landing. Caleb left the building with a single, sad-looking cardboard box of his personal belongings, his career and reputation in tatters. Emma wasn't spared. Although she wasn't fired outright, that would have been too messy from an HR perspective. She was suspended indefinitely, pending an internal investigation. In the cutthroat world of corporate marketing, a suspension like that is a death sentence. It's a polite, legal precursor to being quietly and permanently erased. Her professional life, much like her personal one, was crumbling around her. The courtroom became our final battleground. In our state, while technically no fault, evidence of criminal activity and financial malfeasance during the marriage could have a significant impact on the final settlement. Lucas made sure every damning piece of evidence was presented. The messages, the audio recordings from the hotel, the video from the car. The details of her betrayal, both personal and professional, were laid bare for the court to see. When the judge delivered the final verdict, it was a clean sweep. The house, which had been in my family for generations before our marriage, was awarded solely to me. All our joint bank accounts and investments were mine. Emma, due to her egregious financial misconduct and bad faith actions, was denied any claim to alimony or marital assets. She was ordered to cover all legal fees associated with the case. She left the courtroom with nothing. No home, no money, no career, and no safety net. But Lucas wasn't done. He suggested, and I agreed, that the evidence presented in court should remain part of the public record, accessible to anyone who cared to look. The whispers that had started at the party now became a roar. Her polished, successful image disintegrated completely under the weight of public scrutiny. A few weeks later, she showed up at the house. The house that was now, unequivocally mine. She stood on the porch, clutching a single, small suitcase, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked like a refugee from a war she had started. I opened the door and stood there, holding my cup of coffee, leaning against the doorframe. "Ryan, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't have anywhere to go. I'm so sorry." I looked at her for a long, silent moment, my expression unreadable. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch, letting her stand there in the ruins of the life she had torched. "I don't care about your regrets, Emma," I said finally, my tone as cold and hard as the winter wind that was beginning to blow. "You made your choice. Now, you get to live with it." She opened her mouth to say something else, to plead, to bargain, but I turned and shut the door in her face. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt final, definitive. It was the closing of a chapter one never wanted to read again. I stood in the quiet of my home, and stared out the window as her small, defeated figure disappeared down the driveway. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt something close to peace. The love I had once felt for her, the all-consuming, world-tilting love, was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve to rebuild my life on my own terms. She had destroyed everything we had, but I hadn't let her win. I had taken back control, piece by painful piece. And I had ensured that her betrayal, in all its ugly, greedy detail, would follow her for the rest of her life. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel sorrow. All I felt was the quiet, grim satisfaction of knowing that justice, in its own brutal way, had been served. And as I sat back in my chair, sipping my coffee, I realized I hadn't just survived the storm. I had weathered it. And now, I was free.